3 True Stalker Stories from Reddit. I was stalked because of a single act of meaningless kindness. Just to preface this story, this happened about 12 years ago, when I was around 13 years old. The memories and emotions of this incident had faded away into the back of my mind, but recently I started having flashbacks of this incident, and it led to multiple panic attack while driving/in public. After some deliberation, I thought perhaps writing about it and sharing it with a community that might understand the fear of experiencing this sort of thing might help me feel validated with my emotions. So here goes. I was a 13-year-old living abroad when this happened. To give a short background info that might help you understand the story better, I was living in an apartment complex. Every morning, the school buses would arrive at the main entrance of the entire complex and pick up the kids for school. The church I was attending at that time also operated buses to help people get back home, so every Sunday after the services were done, I would take the church bus back home. I never doubted my sense of security and safeness, since this kind of system made me feel safe and protected. That was until I met him on one Sunday morning. I was a church kid, and quite involved one too. I was serving the youth group as a part of the welcome team for newcomers when I met him. He entered the chapel with his mother following behind, and she explained that they had recently moved to the country and were just starting to settle down. My first impression of him was that he was lanky, shy, and very quiet. He seemed so harmless, innocent, naive. So when his mother left him, after filling out the form, I gave him a smile, greeted him, led him to an empty seat, and I thought nothing more of him until I saw him again in my small group. So I greeted him again, saying something like, "So nice to see you again." I still remember how he just shyly nodded, not really answering me. When the small group time ended, I took out Haichu, Korean soft candy, and gave one to everyone in the group, even the teacher, and as I handed the rectangular candy to him, he softly whispered, "Thank you," and walked away. That was the first time I heard him speak. I hadn't realized that he was living in the same complex as me until I got off the church bus and saw him coming down the steps of the bus as well. It was a funny coincidence, so I told him how weird it was that we were in the same small group and also living in the same complex. He nodded again, and I walked off first because he was waiting for his mom and little sister who were coming behind him. My apartment building was number 20, the first in the row of buildings. I had opened the door and was about to go in when he followed behind me. Me, still in that newcomer greeting mode, responded to this by asking him if he was living in the same building as well. He nodded again. I noticed that his mother and his sister were not here yet, so I got into the elevator first, asked him if he was going to wait for them, and gave him my goodbye when he quietly nodded yes. Next day morning, I saw him waiting in the lobby when I got out of the elevator. He was alone, and I asked him if he was waiting for his sister. He nodded, so I just gave him a quick "have a nice day" and ran off so that I wouldn't miss my school bus. And for every day of that week, I saw him waiting for his sister in the lobby, standing in the corner right in front of the elevators. I didn't think much of it. I would always say hi or good morning to him, and he would just nod or wave timidly. There was nothing more to it than that. That is, until one Sunday, when I got back home after church. He was walking behind me, this time together with his sister and mom, so I thought I would be a nice girl and hold the door for them. So I waited, holding the door open, only to have all three of them walk right past my building. Strange, I thought, so I peeked my head out to see that they were entering building number 15, which was 5 buildings down the street. At first I didn't think much of it, thinking that they might have moved out of building 20 and into building 15. But when I stepped out of the elevator next morning to see him again in the lobby, in the same corner he was standing in every morning, my heart sank deep. I don't know how I responded to it, but I remember choosing not to confront him because I was in denial that this was actually happening and didn't have the courage to ask him for an answer. Things quickly progressed since that day. I started getting late night calls to my cell phone. The typical, not going to speak, but just going to breathe heavily kind of call that you get that makes you feel insecure, even though you know you are safe in your room. He also stopped waiting for me in the lobby since that morning, but would stand in the far corner of the street every day and watch me wait for and get on the bus. Me becoming hypervigilant didn't help with the situation either. I could always spot him watching me, even though he would often try to hide behind a thick tree or the guard's cabin. It made me feel sick to my stomach, but I don't think I felt so threatened and cornered to the point, at least in that moment, that I wanted to seek adult help. I was a very private teenager who was already keeping some traumatic experiences a secret from my parents. So naturally, this felt like another secret that I would keep so they wouldn't worry about me. At church, I kept up my bright facade, but would distance myself as far as possible to avoid any sort of contact with him. I actively put this distance between him and me, because whenever I decided to play by my facade and say hi to him, instead of returning my greetings he would stare once at my face and then just drop his gaze down to my private areas. The fact that it was summer and I was wearing shorts did not help at all whenever he stared at my thighs and between my legs. The shame. The embarrassment. The feeling that I was being dirtied by his gaze. The anxiety, the paranoia, it was too much for me. I started skipping the small group session and left right after the youth group ended, so I would avoid getting home with him at the same time. On days that I did happen to attend small group, I just sat quietly, unwilling to speak a single word, while he stared at me intensely. One day, while the teacher was leading the discussion, he suddenly burst into an angry yell, shouting, "Why do you keep ignoring me when you clearly know that I like you?" Needless to say, I was embarrassed, ashamed, shocked, and terrified all at the same time. The teacher tried to de-escalate the situation, but he stormed out after yelling out how frustrated he was with me for not returning his affection. I wanted to leave as well, but the fear that I might run into him made me stay in my seat, while everyone in the group quietly whispered among themselves about this sudden drama that happened before them. It was a huge shock to me that he was doing all these things because he liked me. But what shook me more at that moment was the fact that the teacher didn't seem to be fazed at all by this sudden outburst. She didn't seem surprised by the fact that he had such feelings for me. Instead, she casted glances at me with some sort of knowing in her eyes. I had always wondered how he got hold of my phone number. This was it. The teacher dismissed everyone, but asked me to stay. I was always the model student at church, but the moment I was left alone with her, I lost it. I cursed and swore, and demanded her to tell me if she knew. If she knew how much he was making my life miserable. She told me she knew he liked me. Apparently he started liking me because of that stupid ass candy I gave him on the first day. She had given him my number because she thought it was cute seeing him like me so much. So I told her what he had been doing. How he waited for me every morning in the lobby, even though he lived in a different building, how he would stare and watch me from the corner of the street, how he would stare between my thighs and my chest, how he would call me late at night, with the heavy breathing and all. I was having trouble speaking and breathing because of how much I was crying, but I remember yelling, "He is like a ducking stalker." And that was when I fully recognized that I was being stalked. When I became quiet due to the shock of realization, the teacher took her chance to speak and told me that he was a mentally troubled kid who didn't know better, so I needed to just bear with it. That was the end of the conversation. Honestly, there is a gap in my memory after that day, so it's hard for me to recall what events had led up to it, but the last time I saw him was when I had the most fearful encounter with him. I was already on the church bus, waiting. There were two girls sitting couple of rows ahead of me, and the bus was silent other than that. I was sitting by the aisle when I saw him get on the bus. The strange thing was that when he got on, the two girls suddenly turned extremely hostile towards him and told him to get the duck off the bus, calling him a ducking pervert. He responded angrily, "Well, you whores aren't the ones I want to see anyways, so shut up." This was the first time I heard him speak such profanities, so I honestly was shocked. Then he fixed his eyes straight at me, walked over to where I was, and sat a row diagonally behind my seat. My heart was pounding at this point, and I wanted to sit by the windows to hide from his gaze, but I was scared that he would think of it as an invitation to sit next to me. So I stayed frozen in my seat until more people came in, and only moved to the window seat when an adult asked if they could sit next to me. I think there was an instinctive feeling that told me I couldn't get off together with him, so I purposefully got off at the stop before my apartment. It was only a 600 meters walk from the bus stop to my home, so I mixed in with the people and got off the bus with them. The bus had stopped by the side entrance of another apartment complex. I just needed to walk down the street to get to mine, but the street was empty and deserted because it was one of those areas that were waiting to be developed by the city. So I started walking towards my home when I realized that he had also gotten off with me. He was walking few feet behind me, and my gut wrenched as he got closer and closer. Something told me being alone with him on this street was dangerous, so I broke into a run until I saw an alleyway that parted off from the road. In my panic, I turned into the alley and was relieved when I saw that there were some smaller shops that were busy with people. There were people hanging in the alleyway, chilling by the benches outside and stuff. I was certain that he couldn't have followed me into the alley after I had ran, but still looked behind to check just in case. But there he was, still following me. He had ran after me. My relief quickly turned into terror, and I hastened my pace, purposefully weaving in between the people in hopes of losing him. But whenever I looked back, I could still see him. Eventually the people hanging by the shops thinned out, and I was walking in an empty alleyway. On the opposite end of the alley, I could see that there was a bigger road with more cars and people. I was already quite out of breath as I wasn't a fit person, but with my last strength I ran for the busy road, hoping to lose him if he was still behind me. I stopped once I reached the busy road and turned around to look into an empty alley. I stood for an extra minute staring into the alley to confirm that he wasn't following me. Fortunately, my friend's house was close by, and so I stayed at her place until I felt it was safe enough to walk back home. That was the last time I saw him. I stopped going to the small groups. I started serving children's department as an accompanist, so I could avoid going to the youth group. I didn't see him again after that, but one time I happened to meet my small group teacher, and she told me that he had left the country. Apparently he was reported multiple times at school for lewd behavior, such as sneaking into the girls' restroom. That was why the girls on the bus were grossed out by him, and in the end, had to be expelled from the school. I think that was when I decided to bury the terror and the fear away, because he was no longer an immediate threat in my life. Funny story though, after that whole incident, I had to watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off at school. But the moment Ferris' friend Cameron Fry showed on the screen, I had to run to the bathroom to throw up, because the actor's face looked exactly like him, and just watching his face brought back the trauma. Now I can watch the movie, but looking at Cameron's face still gives me anxiety. Anyways, if anyone has made it to the end of this long post, thank you for staying through this with me. I often wonder what might have become of him, and wonder if his parents knew what his son was. If he was truly suffering from mental illness, my only hope is that he received the proper treatment so that no one else had to go through what I had to. TL, doctor, I give this guy who was new to the church some candy and be nice to him because that was my role, and on that first day he meets me, he starts stalking me. Stalking stopped when he was expelled from the school and the family moved out of the country as a result. Edit. Wow guys, thank you so much for all of your heartwarming comments. I was actually feeling really bummed that I wasn't receiving any sort of emotional support / validation from my family, but having all of you supporting me with your kind words really have helped me a lot dealing with these emotions. You guys have no idea how grateful I'm for this community of wonderful people. Thank you, love you all. I was stalked by a jilted junkie hookup. This happened literally a month ago, back in February, when my boyfriend and I had decided to try out an open relationship for a little while for various reasons. We live separately in one of the largest cities in the north of Middle America, and there's a decently sized population of college students, like me, to keep the gay community fresh, so I was doing pretty well for myself. One night, I was bored and scrolling through Grindr, looking for an easy hookup, when I got a message from a guy who was barely 800 feet away. He wasn't terrible looking, and I was a little desperate, so I agreed to go to his place. He lives, quite literally, down the street from me. I can see his building from my window. So I walked over, and he let me up and into his apartment. We made small talk, and I mentioned where I lived. Hell, I even pointed out my window from one of the windows in the stairwell. From the first, I thought there was something off about the guy. Not necessarily bad, just different. An odd twitch in his hands when he gripped the banister. The vacancy of his eyes when he smiled. I'm not so cliche as to say he felt evil or anything like that, but I wasn't exactly surprised that, after we got to his apartment, the first thing he did was to tell his very pretty and friendly cat to say hello, and the second thing he did was walk over to the kitchen counter, grab a needle, and shoot up. I hadn't even closed the door behind me. I stood there, staring, and he turned around, dropped the needle on the counter, and went, "Oh, shit, man." Shoulder asked, "You cool with that?" I'm not a good Christian boy. I have broken into a church while tripping on LSD. I had sex on a headstand back in high school. But I have my standards. So I shook my head mutely, pulled my hat back on, and opened the door to leave. The guy rushed over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Yo, I'm sorry, you don't gotta go, we don't gotta duck. Do you wanna watch Transformers 3 with me or something?" "Nope," I said bluntly, hustling away down the stairs. I bundled up my scarf against the early February chill and hurried back down the street to my apartment. He followed me downstairs, barefoot, in pajama pants and a t-shirt, until I stepped outside into the whipping winds. I turned back briefly to look after a moment, and he was still standing there in the doorway, watching me. I didn't have any premonitions of doom or weirdness. I grew up in Missouri. Junkies barely register as odd to me by this point, so I went home and went to bed. Now, you might have guessed it, but I'd never seen this dude around the neighborhood before. Truthfully, I hadn't seen most of my neighbors, because my neighborhood is an odd mixture of white-collar suburbia, college housing, and low-income housing like my Paramour's building, all on one street. So it didn't really register. When I started seeing him more, I would leave for work in the afternoon and he'd be on the other avenue across from my building, strolling along. Or he'd cut across my building's parking lot like all the kids in the neighborhood did. A couple times I saw him walking across the campus mall. My apartment building is directly adjacent to my campus, but he'd always swerve to avoid me. Once or twice I'd notice him in the grocery store I work at as a barista, but it's the only one within walking distance, and he mentioned he didn't have a car. This went on for the entire month of February. Eventually I started noticing. He'd always be walking down the street opposite my building when I left for work at my usual time, and he was only ever at the store when I was working. He'd never approach the coffee stand within the store where I work, but he'd look at me. A couple times I noticed him enter, look at me, pretend to shop, and leave without buying anything. I was starting to feel creeped out, but he hadn't done anything yet to make me feel particularly unsafe. One day, late February, I worked an early shift. When I got off, I was felt a little crazy from lack of sleep, and I reached my place about 20 minutes before I usually leave for work. And on the corner of the sidewalk opposite me was a guy. He was checking his watch over and over and looking up. I did a bit of brilliant deductive analysis and followed his gaze up to my living room window. Then I looked back down at him. He looked right at me. There was a moment of tension as we stared each other in the eyes. Like I said, this dude didn't give off any evil or dark vibes. I've met people that do. No, what I saw in this guy's eyes, in his face, was much more human and much scarier. Desperation. Loneliness. Pain. And anger. He hurried after me, but I'm 6'3" and a former sprinter, whereas he was a 5'8" junkie wearing flip-flops on ice. I made it to the first set of doors to my apartment, scanned myself in through the second, and locked them behind me. He walked through the unlocked first set, tried to open the second, tried pushing the handicap button to open them, and then gave up. "Look, man, I'm sorry," he shouted, laying a hand on the glass of the door. "Can we talk about it?" I shook my head. "Absolutely not. Leave me alone." Then I whirled on my heel and stomped over to the elevator. When I turned back, he was gone out into the snow. I didn't see him for a couple weeks afterward, which is nice, because my boyfriend likes to walk down the street past the dude's apartment when he stays over and needs to go smoke. One night, my boyfriend was over at my place. He'd just gone out to smoke before we went to bed, and he mentioned that he wanted me to come with him the next time he went out. "Why?" I asked, pulling him in close to me while he shivered. "It's dark and cold, and I get paranoid out there sometimes," he mumbled into my chest. "There's this creepy dude that sometimes stands on the corner across the way and just stares at the building. One time he asked me for a cig, and I told him I didn't have one when I had one literally in my hand. He laughed, kissed my chin, and passed out. I laid there awake, troubled. When I was sure my boyfriend was deeply asleep, meaning after about 5 minutes had passed, I extricated myself and went to the window. It was a cold, clear night. I could see, across the street, under the orange glow of the street light, was a guy. I couldn't make him out clearly, but when he saw me he waved. I flicked him off and closed the blinds. I didn't feel like I should tell my boyfriend, because he was either gonna immediately go to the police, which I hate doing, or he'd try and defend me. And while I love him with my entire heart, I don't wanna watch a fight between a junkie stalker and my underweight nicotine addicted boyfriend. So I kept it to myself and still haven't told him. But I did start accompanying him when he went out to smoke. The guy was usually outside. Sometimes he'd follow us for a bit before ducking away down a side street. Sometimes he'd watch from a distance. Sometimes he'd be up in his apartment. My boyfriend never noticed. I kept my composure and nothing happened. One night, though, we went out so my boyfriend could smoke like normal. When we'd reached the end of the street and turned around, the stalker was behind us, about 50 feet back. I turned my head to check, and there he was. He waved at me again, and something told me I had to get back inside. "Hey babe," I said quietly to my boyfriend, "let's get back inside, yeah? I'm cold." "AWW baby," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Okay. I'm almost done anyway." We walked back to the apartment building, and without turning I knew that the stalker was behind us the entire time. I kept my hand intertwined with my boyfriend's and kept up the casual conversation we'd been having about how I hate geese. We got back up to my apartment and he got changed for bed while I grabbed some water. So I've never lived in an apartment before, and I don't know if it's odd or not, but this building has a wired telephone in each unit that rings when someone wants let in. Ours never rings unless it's Uber Eats, so my boyfriend was surprised when it started ringing late at night when neither of us had ordered anything. "Probably just some asshole playing a prank," I said, unhooking the phone from the wall and putting it in the kitchen cabinet. He accepted that without a struggle, and we lay down in bed. After he was soundly out, I got up, got dressed, grabbed a couple things, and headed downstairs in my thick winter coat. Sure enough, my fanboy was out there, in the parking lot. He waved at me and jogged over, smiling broadly. "Hey man. What do you want?" I said flatly. "Look, man, I feel like we ended things awkwardly last time, and I just wanted to talk to you," he said. "So you stalked me?" "What?" He started to look angrier, his brows furrowing. Nah, man, I didn't stalk you. I just wanted to know when I could talk to you, but you always avoid me. Now you're walking around out here with that skinny little bitch boy trying to rub it in my face and I don't ducking appreciate that. Look, man, he said, smiling again, stepping closer, you wanna go talk about this back at my place? Ditch the white boy and come hang out with me tonight. Please? I won't shoot up or nothing this time. He took another step closer to me. I saw, in his right hand, a dully gleaming piece of metal, a folded up switchblade. He smiled at me, and I stepped back, shaking my head. His smile drained away into a deep scowl. Bitch, I'm done asking. You're gonna come over to my place now, and finish what we started, he growled, unfolding the knife, and pointing it at me. This dude was 5'8", tops, and skinny. I'm 6'3", 200 pounds, and regularly lift weights. Also, I had a 12-inch kitchen knife, which I drew from my coat pocket, and leveled at his throat. He looked at my knife, and then back at his, and smiled again. Bro, I was just playing, we can just talk right here bro, I don't. Leave me and my boyfriend alone, I said, very quietly, or I will cut your face off and eat it. What the duck? I spent 8 years in juvie for stabbing a kid in middle school, I lied. He backed up, putting the knife back in his pocket. I took a step closer, holding my knife level. He backed away, quickly, almost falling on the ice, until he was full sprinting back to his place, and I was chasing him down with my knife, until he crossed the street and I stopped, slid the knife in my pocket, and watched him run back to his building. Then I went back up to my bedroom, told my boyfriend I just had to go pee, and fell asleep. So, nameless horny junkie, let's not meet again. Or I'll eat your face.